Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This week we're going to be finding slope from a table. Last week we were focusing on graphs. However, we're now moving to tables because we know that another way to represent a graph is through a table, which means that we still are looking for slope, which means a rate that describes how one quantity changes in relation to another quantity. So we are looking at the relationship between our x coordinates and our y coordinates to determine how it's changing, because with a linear relationship, that change is consistent. Now, slope is a new word we learned. However, what's another way I can call slope? If you said rate of change, you are absolutely correct. So let's go ahead and get started in learning how to solve for slope from a table. Now on a graph, I could visually select two ordered pairs and figure out the distance between them. And we said that was called rise over run. What that technically meant is we were trying to find how y was changing and putting it in a ratio over how x was changing. Now in math, instead of writing the word change each time, we are going to use a triangle to represent that. So anytime that you see a triangle, it's letting you know that we're looking for the change. So we're trying to find the change in y, and we're going to put that over the ratio for change in x, just like we did with graphs. Rise over run was y over x, the change in y over the change in x. Now on a table, it's going to work out the same exact way. We're going to be selecting 2 points and we're going to set up a ratio. Now I am going to show you for some tables, those points change consistently or they use the same pattern, and other times they try and trick you by changing it up. It does not really matter which 2 points you pick because either way it will still give you the same answer. So now let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be selecting 2 points here. I usually just pick the first 2. You can pick other points because I know some of you don't like working with integers, and that's okay. So I'm going to select 6 to 4 because that's my y-axis. Going from 6 to 4, that actually decreases. So I'm going to put negative, and that decreases by 2. Now this was for my y-axis, so I'm going to be putting that as my numerator. And for my denominator, I'm going to figure out what's happening with x. I'm going to make sure, though, that I use the same 2 points. So it needs to be points that are ordered pairs together. So now I'm going from -4 to 0. Now from -4 to 0, that actually increased because it went up higher and it increased by 4. So my denominator will be 4. Now from here, I could say -2/4 is my final answer, but I always want you to remember we need to think about whether we can simplify this ratio. Is this ratio something we can simplify? Yes, it is. We can divide both of these numbers by 2, which means we can simplify by 2, so our final answer should be 1/2. And don't forget one of those points was negative, so it is -1/2. And that is the slope for this table. That's the slope for this relationship. Let's go ahead and move on to example number 2. Alrighty, so now we have another table, so we need to solve for slope. How is this table or relationship changing? So again, I need to find the change in y over the change in x. Now, like I told y'all, some of you don't like working with integers, and that's okay. This table has some positive numbers. So if I wanted to, I could use these points right here. I could also use these points right here. What matters is that I'm selecting one of these ordered pairs and finding my change. I'm going to select 8 to 20. So going from 8 to 20, that is an increase of 12. So for my change in y, I know that it increased by 12. Now let's go ahead and figure out the change in x. Like I said, since I picked these 2 pairs right here, I need to make sure that I'm doing the same thing over here. So going from 2 to 5, that also increased, and that increased by 3. So my denominator would be 3. So I could say 12/3 is my slope. However, I need to ask myself, can I simplify this? Can we simplify this? Of course we can. We can divide both of these by 12. Not by 12, by 3 I mean. So let's simplify by 3. 12 divided by 3 gives us 4, and 3 divided by 3 gives us 1, which means I could leave this as a ratio of 4 over 1, or this also means my slope is 4. Whichever one of these answers is correct, we just try and put it as a whole number instead of an improper fraction. Alrighty, that is it. So now we're going to do some examples where you get to try this out. So let's move on to that. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, can you tell me what is the slope of this table? So let's see if you're correct. Now, I might not pick the same ordered pairs that you selected, and that's okay. Either way, it should equal the same thing because this table represents a linear relationship. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and select just the first 2 points. So going from 5 to 2, that's a negative change, and that decreased by 3. So my numerator, my change in y is negative 3. And now let me look at my x value. Going from negative 3 to negative 2, some of you might have been tricked. You might have thought that decreased. But remember, on the negative side, the larger we think the number is, it's actually the smaller number. So that actually increased by 1 because it's getting closer to 0, so it's increasing. And so my ratio, I could say, is negative 3 over 1. That cannot be simplified, but that is an improper fraction that could be changed to a whole number. So you could have said your slope is negative 3 over 1, or it's negative 3. Alrighty, let's move on to the next example. All right, and don't be tricked. I know this table is facing horizontally instead of vertically, but let's see if you remember what you've learned. What is the slope of this table? So let's check to see if you are correct. I am going to pay close attention to my ordered pairs. I want y to be my numerator, so I'm going to pick 2 points from my y values. Going from 22 to 32, it increased by 10, so my numerator will be 10. And now looking at my x value, my denominator, that increased by 2. Now, 10 halves right now is my slope, but this can be simplified, so that would not be a correct final answer. This can be simplified by 2. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And this is also an improper fraction. So I could also say my final answer is 5. So for your slope, we could say 5 over 1 or 5 wholes. Let's go ahead and move on to the last example. What is the slope or rate of change of the given table? Knowing some of y'all, you might have skipped over those integers, and that's okay, those negative numbers. So let me pick my y values in the positive area. 3 to 7 is an increase of 4. Why did I put 3? So my numerator is 4, and my x values changed by an increase of 1. This cannot be simplified, so 4 over 1s could be my slope, or I can make that into a whole number of 4. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, you have learned how to solve for slope. Remember, we're looking for the change in y, so we can put it in a ratio over change in x. And then if we need to, we'll simplify that fraction. That doesn't always happen, so pay very close attention to that. And now that you've done this Edpuzzle, go ahead and move on to your task number 3 and make sure that you hit submit on that assignment.